Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here. Hope you're all having a lovely Friday? Yeah, Friday, I'm pretty sure. Good to see you all. I'm here with a very special new little thing, which is that we have a brand new short story coming out from the guys over at Total War, and I figured I would just do a video of my live reading on it and everything that's going to be in it, but this should be pretty hype because I have no idea what's in this. But it's by David Guymer. Oh my lord. So we have a short story here by David Guymer, and we're just gonna hop right into it. And it looks to be about Dechala. So it's called 6 Sacrifices. Alright. The village of Punan emerged from the jungle like a toad. Bug-eyed and warty, not a village so much as a malignant cluster of bamboo huts. Jinwu and his companions had traveled a long way from Fuhong. Okay, so we're down in southern CATHAY. They had, it seemed, traveled a long way from anywhere. The old jade warrior swept the sun-white rope of his queue over his shoulder. His fine mail glistened in the jungle damp. Huge dark rings stained his green silk tunic under the armpits. "I see no wall," said Jian Hong, dripping sweat as he frowned at the still distant village, slumped in the saddle of his fat white horse. The young noble claimed to be the nephew of the great Yuan Fu, the much-beloved magistrate of Fuhong. And it was probably true. Yao Wen was himself purported to be the great nephew of the fire dragon Li Dao, and that was a dangerous inheritance to lay claim to without cause. He had certainly inherited his immortal ancestor's temper, if nothing else. Jin tilted his head back and strained his eyes and saw that his employer was correct. He thought on that. There were monsters in Xi'an. Okay, so we're in the jungles of Xi'an. Yeah, so we're definitely very southern CATHAY. This everyone knew. Some had followed the barbarians across the Jade Sea. A few had even proven deadly enough to survive. The jungles of southern CATHAY had their own share of indigenous horrors, many of which prowled their sweltering death since before the coming of the dragons. Hulking reptilian creatures who worshipped golden idols and raided lonely outposts for blood sacrifices. That's really, really cool. So they're confirming here that, oh, that's interesting. So it seems like they're talking about the Naga of Koresh here, but they could be talking about like ancient lizard. Well, no, because before the coming of the dragons. So yeah, they're talking about, so we know the Naga of Koresh are pre-dragon, according to this myth, according to this rumor. Which, if they were pre-dragon, means that they're pre-old one, more than likely. I mean, before the coming of the dragons, that's ridiculously ancient. I mean, and if they're doing blood sacrifices, it's probably the Naga, but this would mean the Naga are like fantastically old. Wild elves, as alien to the horse and wine merchants who brought their eagle ships to Shiwu as Jin from the Wo, the Manchu, or the Kazakh. Nomadic hunters who would... Wild elves as alien to the horse and wine merchants who brought their eagle ships to Okay, so wild elves who are really, really different. Oh, wait, no. They're talking about the Koreshi here. So are they talking about the lizardmen? Maybe this is the lizardmen, or maybe it's something completely new. I have no idea what that is. Hulking reptilian creatures. I mean, because of the golden idols, it sounds like the lizardmen, whereas this part's about the Naga. Also, they misspelled Koresh. Okay, so we have wild elves who sound like wood elves. Yeah, they sound like wood elves, or maybe a new type of elf, but it sounds like some sort of wood elf. Wild elves, as different from the high elves. So it's basically saying they're as exotic from the high elves as Cathayans are from the Wo, the Manchu, or the Kazakh tribes, which are all chaos tribes. The dreaded Wo, the Manchu, and the Kazakh. They would as soon skin a man as a leopard or an elephant. That's fascinating. Monkey warriors from the mountains of heaven, tigermen who chafed under the vassalage of the Iron Dragon and sought to claim a new homeland in the jungle. Okay, so that confirms there are Cathayan tigermen, not just Indian tigermen, but Cathayan ones as well. Which makes sense, because we have the village of the tigermen. To say nothing of the unspeakable things that slid across the border from Koresh. So, we potentially just got a huge lore drop of new elves. I mean, they sound like wood elves, but I don't think they would be like Azrai. It sounds like they might be almost kind of like the Larlorn elves, where it's like a new subculture of elves. But that's fascinating. I had no idea there was a huge wood elf group in Southern Cathay. That is brand new. For the past year, there have been rumors of a great madness, a plague of hedonism and fury sweeping through the villages east of the Serpent River. These were difficult places to reach at the best of times, neglected and occasionally rebellious, and while the Fire Dragon did not care to subjugate them fully, the city, court, and Fu Hong remained content to ignore their plight. Why Jian Hong would volunteer to lead an expedition to investigate, Jin Wu did not know. Presumably, he had expected to browbeat some local elders, quash some foolish superstitions, and return to Fu Hong with a scar or two, having demonstrated his manliness and courage. The jungle had failed to oblige. I do not believe a wall would have helped, Jin offered at length. It may have, said Jian Hong. You don't know. It did not help Wai Li. The young Shukagun glowered straight ahead, but offered no further argument. Both of their minds turned the horrors they had uncovered there. For walls, as Jin's master in the far north had often mused, only advertised that one had something to hide. They worship strange gods east of Wali. Yi Jun had said back at the tea parlor in Fu Hong, where Jian Hong had hired the last members of their expedition. The floors had been bare wood, with patterned rugs for sitting or kneeling upon, and bamboo mats for hot porcelain. The air had smelled of nanmu wood, furnishings, steamed rice, and chahua leaves. This was before the boy had learned who he was, of course, and not been too awed by his reputation to speak freely with him. Yi Jun was an odd name to northern ears, but common enough in the villages of the Serpent Estuary, beyond the broken lands of Tianli. Jin Wu recalled smiling at the boy's words. In Wei Jin, they said the same about Mingzhu. In Mingzhu, they said it of Shang Wu, and in Shang Wu, they most definitely said it of Fu Hong. Every town and village in Grand Cathay had its own minor deities and spirits. And each grew in wickedness with the distance between its home village and the peasant that spoke of it. That's super interesting. So the dragons are very, very they're very anti-god. But here we're learning that all of the towns and villages in Grand Cathay have their own minor deities and spirits, which they should. That's how the Warhammer world works. And Grand Cathay seems to be fairly magically charged. That's fascinating. That's really, really great. Describe these gods to me, he said. There's one in particular. They say she is half snake and half woman, dangerous and beautiful, but craving luxuries that Xian cannot give her. Every moon, the people send offerings to her temple in Meishan, in the hope that she will visit their village and dance for them. Dance for them? I tell you only what I heard. You never witnessed these revels yourself? The peasant looked genuinely offended. No, Master Wu. But I was with the garrison at Ashong, and the villagers from the mountains always come begging for silk and wine for the snake of Meishan. It was, Jin Wu remembered thinking, about a year since the Tower of Ashong fell to the barbarians. The Tower of... Okay, so the Tower of Ashong is gone. Perhaps the snake is a monster from Koresh, Yi Jun mused aloud. I hear they worship such creatures in those heathen lands. Jin stroked the faint silver of his beard as he pondered that. His tea cooled, untouched, to the mat beside him. She was a monster, certainly, but she was not from Koresh. Okay, I'm curious if this is gonna be this is gonna show the new lore for Dechala, because I'll make a separate video about it, but Dechala is likely gonna be going potentially through some lore changes if she ends up being used. Well, you know what, let's just get to the end of the story and see what happens. That's interesting though. Man, there's a ton of huge lore drops in here. Distance was deceptive in the mountains. What had looked like a journey of hours ended up taking the entire day, the sun sinking over the northern foothills of Meishan as the expedition from Fu Hong trailed at last into Punan. There was Zhang Hong on his horse, Jin Wu and Yi Jonhoi, the porter Mei, Bent back over the tent-like frame of baggage lashed across her shoulders, the enormous leering devil mercenary Bao, and last of all, Xing Lu, the alchemist, clutching the metal talismans that he wore around his neck, as if for protection from the foul miasma, hoisting his golden silk robes out of the muddy path. 6 in all, an auspicious number, or Jin had learned to believe. I do not like it, Master Wu, said Yi Jun. Their guide was tan, taut, and insect-bitten, draped in a filthy linen shirt that was several sizes too large for him. It is too quiet. I see no one in the field, said Zeng, pointing the sulfur-stained, ring-encrusted finger. This is the alchemist, yeah. The fields he spoke of were terraces, cut from the escarpments above the village for the growing of rice, accessible by swaying rope bridges and a stone causeway. Maybe they're sleeping through the heat, said Jiang Hong. In the world of Jiang Hong Fu, this was entirely reasonable. Zeng bowed apologetically. Rice needs constant care, Lord. Mei shot him a look as if to question what a magician from the Warpstone Desert knew about rice, but kept it to herself. Such thoughts were above her station. Bao, meanwhile, chewed phlegmatically on a blade of sweet sorghum. Yi Jun had given it to keep the ogre's jaws busy and his mind distracted from any thoughts he might have of eating one or both of the 2 peasants. If he had an opinion, then he clearly thought it surplus to what Jiang Hong was paying him for. Jin looked around. The village was deserted. Doors hung agape, not broken in or ripped off their hinges, as one would expect if Punan had fallen to raiders from Ashung, just left open as though their inhabitants had simply shrugged off their possessions and walked away. Rotting fruit and lewd calligraphy daubed the walls they had left behind. A single slowly rising track wound through the middle of Punan. With Jinwu in the lead, the expedition followed it, stepping over bits of broken pottery and discarded clothing littered as they neared the village center. Jin's nose wrinkled. Baiju, said Mei. Peasant wine, long since turned to vinegar. It looks like a hall after a feast, said Jiang Hong. I've never been to a feast like this, said Zeng with feeling. The Shukengun gave Alchemist a brittle smile. Then you have never been a guest of the Sea Court. Okay, so the court of Yin. A small square marked the village center. A brightly painted bamboo arc representing the serpentine form of Punan's patron dragon stood across it. Jinwu cast his eye over the simple shrine. It represented Li Dao, presumably, given the proximity to Fu Heng and the fact that Yin rarely cast her eyes south of the Great River. It was difficult to be sure, however. The golden calligraphy had faded, granting license to some recent wit to amend the characters, transforming a dry list of the dragon's names and titles into a profane verse at that same dragon's expense. Jinwu read the perfectly metered poem under his breath. It was, for such a torrid backwater, a remarkable piece of lyricism. No one else appeared to have noticed. The reason for this was the body that lay beneath the ark, a morbid offering for a disinterested dragon. It was a young man in a woman's dress, a string of necklaces wound around his neck and rings encrusted on all 10 of his fingers. He reeked of sour wine. Lumps of dried vomit crusted his blue lips. Mei looked as though she was going to throw up herself. Ye Jun did not look much better. Xing Liu buried his face in his sleeve. Bao gave the body a poke with the open toe of one shield-sized wooden sandal, in case the dead man might cough up the vomit in his throat and lurch upright. But he did not. Jinwu crouched stiffly over him, one hand on the serpent-headed hilt of his sword. There were no signs of violence on the body. The peasant appeared to have drunk himself to death right here beneath the village shrine. A feast, Jiang Hong mumbled again, though it was clear the idea no longer amused him. It is as bad as Hua Li, said Ji Jun. Also, forgive me for the pronunciations. Worse, said Zeng. Jiang Hong scowled at them, for the same unwanted thought had evidently made itself welcome in his head as well. Whatever evil lay behind this madness, it appeared to be moving inexorably westwards, out of the heart of Xi'an and ever closer to the populated lands of Tianli. Mei shrugged awkwardly out of her pannier and unpacked a bow. Showing nothing on his own face, Jin looked up. A handful of crude huts leant in from the cliff walls, bolted into the rock face or wedged between the lurid tangle of eucalyptus trees. A muggy breeze rustled the branches, whispering through the rice terraces all around. Somewhere in that emptiness, a door banged against a wall. May swung towards the sound, smoothly knocking an arrow and drawing back the string until the green duck feathers tickled her ear. Zeng rolled up his sleeves to free his hands for spellcasting. Bao lumbered protectively in front of his paymaster, unsettling the Shukengen's horse with his huge right bulk, if not their phantom assailant. "You are jumping at nothing," Jiang Hung hissed. "This village is..." Whatever he thought it to be went unsaid, and likely for the best, as a young woman came stumbling out into the square from one of the defiled huts. Her homespun was torn and bloody. Too bloody, Jin thought. It dripped from her fingertips as she tottered on, left sodden prints on the ground under her feet. She would have had to bathe in it, stand under a gurgling spout of it like a child on a hot day, rolled in a puddle of it like a dog with an itch. The woman turned her head from side to side, and with a thrill of horror, Jin realized that someone or something had gouged out her eyes. "Dechala," she gurgled, tongueless, it seemed, as well as eyeless, despite the beatific smile on her blood-speckled lips. "I urge you, Dechala." Ooh, man, that's this is a very good / horror story. May tensed, but before she could loose an arrow, the blind woman tripped over a bundle of clothing and fell flat into the street. A nervous chuckle bubbled up from Jiang Hong's lips. His relief, however, was short-lived. A second figure emerged from the same hut. This one was shapely and androgynous, neither male nor female, yet both at the same time, depending on how one looked and if one dared look at all. It surpassed the mortal conceit of beauty the way a fireball surpassed the pleasant warmth of a candle. Its eyes were limpid pools. Its lavender skin was smooth as a petal. One slender arm ended in an elegant pincher, glittering in the sunset, conjuring images of glass and gems and crystals, making promises of exquisite pain. The perfect appendage, it occurred to Jin, for snipping off tongues and delicately plucking out eyes. The creature stepped over the mewling peasant. It did not move so much as shimmer from point to point, a conjurer plucking flower after flower from their sleeves to the delight of the crowd, all the while flowing effortlessly nearer. Given how thoroughly it drew the eye, it should not have been possible to notice the identical twin that slipped into the square behind it. Somehow, Jin did so, affording equal and undivided attention to both. Whatever the cost to his own sanity, May still had an arrow on her string, but it never occurred to her to loose it. Bao drooled, mouth agape. Zeng, Yijun, and Jiang Hong simply stared. Even the horse was captivated. Beauty given deadly form. It surpassed species. It transcended thought. Jinwu's hand floated to the handle of his sword. At all that his companions felt, he felt in equal measure. But as one looking down at his emotions from a great height, he was a mountain. Lust and spite and envy brushing past him like clouds. As a younger man, he had tutored his body in pleasure and hardened it against pain. Now he feared neither. Indeed, he had learned to relish those things that might tempt or unsettle him. The smell of cooked rice, the clink of hot tea being poured, so that he might have the pleasure of conquering them once more, as a wrestler might savor the soreness of his arms after a hard-fought contest. He had fasted, that he might overcome hunger, walked barefoot across the Warpstone Desert and into the Celestial Mountains, that he might drink from the Jade River's mystical source. In the dark lands west of Asher, he had touched the edge of madness itself and seen what lay beyond. Oh, he had seen it. He had encountered creatures as these in the barbarian lands. Demonettes, they were called. They exuded a musk that lowered the inhibitions even as it elevated the senses. There were tea parlors in Fuchao where one could experience such deadly aphrodisiacs without first needing to brave the Ivory Road, and merchants who would pay dearly for a man with the skills to provide them. There were periods of Jin's career that he regretted, but even the proudest aesthetic needed to earn coin. In his later years, he discovered the art of meditation, sharpening his will even as his body succumbed to the pains and frustrations of old age. His expression, one of perfect harmony. He drew his sword. The blade was silver, the hilt was gold. The pommel, a perfectly weighted piece of jade, had been worked into the stylized claws of a dragon. Green tassels fluttering in the air as he swept the blade up at a cross, left hip to right shoulder. neatly severing one pincer-clawed arm at the shoulder. Shrieking in delight, the demonette reeled away from him. The second pounced. Jin was not as deft as he once was. He had never been as quick as the demonette. Sure, certainly. But then what mortal was? As an old Shifu in Wei Jin, older than Jin was now, and many years in Shiyama's kingdom, had drummed into his pupils, so saying been dead for a long time. The student reacts, the master prepares. Let the young hare run, he would say. The tortoise, if he is wise, knows exactly where he wishes to be. He was, if nothing else, a little wiser. Reversing his grip on the sword handle, Jin swept the blade from left to right at neck height, neatly striking off the demonette's head even as it prepared to deliver its punch. The head sighed as it spun off its neck. Jin ignored it, shifting his hands around the grip once more, turning through the hips and thrusting the celestial forged tip of his sword through the first demonette's heart. Interestingly, silver would be perfect against demons. It's one of the few materials that can actually harm them reliably. They both perished simultaneously, the two demonettes dissolving together in a last, breathlessly immodest display of guts and ichor. With a flick of the wrist, Jin cleared the residue from his blade and resheathed it. 4 movements, 2 enemies slain. Simple, neat, perfect. Xing Liu blinked at the space before him where the ghost of perfection had just been. What? He managed. Fiends of excess, said Jin. He did not try to explain. And beyond the shrine, the blind woman wept without tears, as if the last beautiful thing in the world had just died. I love this thing of Dechala being all like, oh, what are they doing over there? They put the survivor out of her misery and made camp in the rice terraces overlooking the village. Yin Jun pointed out several sets of tracks heading out into Punan and south into the foothills of Meishan. But with dusk setting in, the carnivorous night chorus ringing from the jungle, no one suggested going further that night. Jin Wu thought of the peasant woman, her demonic-esque consorts, the look of bliss on her face as he had bidden her to kneel and driven his sword through her chest. Had the villagers been dragged screaming into Meishan, or had they gone willingly? Mei rolled out bamboo sleeping mats while Yejun prepared a supper of cold rice, cold tea, and dried fruits. They set no fire, wary of the shadow of the mountains. Nights in Xi'an were unpleasantly warm and sticky, in any case. Jiang Hong's horse wandered off on its own, spurning the blanket that Mei attempted to throw over it, to nibble at Punan's untended rice crop. The Shukengan himself hugged his knees and rocked slowly on his haunches, staring into the blackness before him. His brush with the handmaidens of the Dark Prince seemed to have fractured something in his mind. It happened sometimes. No one could say why one man broke while another did not, but Jin could not pretend to be wholly surprised in this case. Birth and bloodline were fine things, but arrogance was a brittle clay. Yi Jun attempted to feed him a rice cake, more out of habit than out of pity, and certainly not out of loyalty. The boy offered the unwanted cake to Jin, who smiled and shook his head. It found a ready home in Bao's cavernous belly. We should make for Fu Hong as soon as it is light, Zheng murmured, so softly he may as well have been speaking to himself. And tell Magistrate Fu what? Jin answered mildly. That something is coming. We still do not know what happened to the people of Wylie, or of Punan. We know more than enough. Maybe they was all eaten, Bao rumbled. Zheng looked ill. Do you think that is what happened, Master Wu? Jin turned to look at the darkening village. I think not. I think that would have been merciful. A pity the woman who might have told us is dead. Everyone, with the obvious exception of Jiang Hong, turned towards Mei. The girl blushed and averted her eyes, evidently realizing she had just spoken well above her station. Jin smiled at her. He had always believed in self-betterment. The celestial dragon himself could not command the world, but even the least of humankind could, with willpower and effort, improve their own standing in life. So his master in the north had striven to teach him. She would have told you nothing, he explained kindly, even if her demon lovers had left her with a tongue. She was enthralled to the Prince of Excess, and there is no return from such a fate. You sound as if you know something of it, said Zheng. Jin frowned at nothing for a moment. How could one recount the things he had seen beyond the Great Bastion? If the words to do so existed anywhere, and perhaps in the fiendish dark tongues spoken by the Beastmen tribes of the furthest north they did, Well, it should actually be beast tongue, not dark tongue. But anyway, then the very uttering of them would surely drive his listeners mad. Perhaps there was no describing the world as it truly was to one who had never seen beyond the ordered garden of CATHAY. It would be like explaining mountains to a fish, or teaching poetry to the sun. One could only see it for oneself and hope to endure the revelation with sanity intact, or die the richer for having flown so close to true understanding, as Jiang Hung has clearly failed to do. I know something of it, he said. It was such an understatement. It almost felt worse than a lie. They broke camp at dawn, following the listener's trail into Meishan. There was an urgency to their step now, and they all felt it, even Zheng Liu, who continued to argue for returning to Fu Heng even as they left Punan behind them. The freshness of the corpse they had found in the village shrine, the clarity of the tracks in the boggy ground, the mere existence of a survivor. It told them all that whatever happened here, it had happened recently. If any villagers had been taken, they might yet live, and their attackers, whoever they were, might still be close. Ye Jun turned to help Jin up a particularly steep collection of rocks. Jin felt no shame in accepting the younger man's hand. He was old and slow. It was simply the way things were. The ground had become progressively softer and more rugged as they had climbed. Where bare rock showed through the lush vegetation, it was slippery and wet. Tangled vines encroached on the trail, some of it purplish in hue and sticky to the touch, exuding a sweet scent not dissimilar from the soporific perfume of the demonettes. This plant life of Meishan was deeply corrupted. That much was abundantly clear. Bao stomped a short way ahead, flattening the poisoned undergrowth under his massive sandals and hacking at more stubborn leaves and vines with a heavy-bladed dowel. Mei followed in the ogre's wake, bent almost double between the weight of her pannier and the steepness of the climb, yet still finding the strength to lead Jiang Hong's horse. The man himself swayed in the saddle, and would have surely fallen to his death had one of Mei or Ye Jun not been there to catch him. He had not stirred since the morning. Jin could not say if he had slept. He seemed oblivious to everything. "May I help you with your helmet, Master Wu?" With a shrug, Jin pulled it off and handed it over. The boy looked elated. "Before the tower at Ashung fell to the barbarians, there was a jade warrior who would tell tales of your adventures, and how you came to be the champion of Asher. He said that he was there, at Asher, that he carried water for you and your comrades, even though he was too young to fight. How he saw you hold the gate for a week and a day before defeating the barbarian sorcerer king in single combat." "Oh, Sayl! Sayl! The faithless placed many swords that day before facing mine, or faced many swords that day before facing mine. Perhaps on another day, things would have taken a different path, for himself and for Asher." So, okay, so this is so cool. Okay, so this is confirmation that Sayl the Faithless has attacked the Tower of Asher twice. So he went back and attacked it again. But the second time he attacked it, it sounds like it lasted for a week. Whereas because the first time it was like a single night. It was like a very fast attack. And Sayl didn't fight. Like, he very explicitly did not fight. This time he did fight and still lost, it sounds like, but was ultimately defeated. With an effort of will, he put that thought to one side. It was the young man's insecurity, well-worn and almost comfortable in his familiarity. Doubt was a fruitless endeavor. He knew this as well as anyone, and had worked as diligently on his as any whooshing monk in their garden. The whooshing monks. But even as he had carefully trimmed all want and fear from himself, this one pernicious memory remained. 40 years of neglect, giving it hardy stems and deep roots. What if he had fallen that day? What if he had deserved to? What if he had simply been lucky? Huh. Interesting. Is this saying that he fought there 40 years ago? That can't be right. Or maybe he's saying that he's in his 40s. and that's the only thing he hasn't dealt with. I'm not exactly sure what that. I'm thinking it's saying that he's maybe in his. No, they're saying he's almost 70 years old. Interesting. So they're saying that he fought. Huh. That's definitely different. Because that. Man, okay, that's like bonkers. Because Sayl the Faithless, his canonical attack on the Tower of Asher happens in like 25. Ooh, it's like 2510 or something like that. It's like in the early. It's before. I know it's before 2512. Which is 10 years before the start of the end times. So like I could see it being 10 years ago, but 40 years ago, that's way too long. That is way too long for that one. Yeah, no, that's definitely, that's different. That's a pretty significant lore change, because Sayl the Faithless, according to the Tarmakon story, the first time he's ever seen the Tower of Asher is when he attacks it during the Tarmakon War. Anyway, what if let's see, what if he had simply gotten lucky? His one great fear was that old age might finally claim him before he could find the answer to that question. That, more than the fate of Fu Heng or the lives of a few score peasants, what had brought him south. A challenge to rival that which his younger self had faced at Asher. The snake of Meishan. The denied one. That was what his master had called her. He was almost 70 years old. Win or lose, he understood that this quest would be his last. I heard that the Sorcerer King fled with his armies, Yejun went on, oblivious to the hero of his tale's melancholy spirits, and that you left your legion in Asher to pursue him over the plains of Zar, swearing to end his reign forever. Jin sighed. I was young and foolish. I do not understand. I left my post and my comrades, forsook my oath to the Gate Warden of Asher and my duty to the Dragon Emperor. For a noble cause? Jin's lip curled. For pride, boy. I did it for pride. And did you ever find the Sorcerer King again? I have never heard the tale from anyone who could say. Jin hesitated, but if the boy noticed, then he clearly ascribed it to breathlessness. I did. And defeated him? Once and for all? Jin opened his mouth, but was spared the need to answer by a cry from up ahead. So, okay, I feel like this, I think David Guymer may have misunderstood when the Tarmakon fight happens. That's the only thing I could think, because it describes him even chasing Sayl west. So this seems like it's referencing Sayl's attack on the Tower of Asher, and that this guy was there for it, and then after Sayl was routed and went west and Tarmakon's horde went west, this guy followed him, from what seems to be being said, but we'll see. Xinglu had found a break in the trees and was stood looking down the escarpment. Glad for the change of subject, Jin went to join him. There at the base of the cliff, buried in the jungle like bits of eggshell in some enormous reptile's nest, was another village. It was larger than Punan, almost as large as Wali, and appeared to have been deserted for longer than either. A year or more, Jin thought, from the extent to which its wide streets and wooden huts had been reclaimed by the jungle. It occurred to him that they could be looking at one of the first villages in the southern provinces to displease the snake of Meishan. Jin felt a tingle in the base of his spine at the sight. What is this place? Said Zeng. I am not sure, said Yijun. I did not know there was even a village here. It had a wall, Jin observed dryly, but Jianhong did not reply. A tall pagoda rose through the tangle of swaying bamboo canes and dwarf trees. While Mei tied up the horse and Yejun helped their dazed employer dismount, Jin looked up at the building. He was unfamiliar with the style. At its most basic, it resembled the Wuxing monasteries one might encounter in the more remote regions of the imperial provinces, but reimagined by some sordid barbarian mind. The walls had been woven from bamboo into an intricate lattice, each strand painstakingly etched into the likeness of a snake. The resulting nest seemed to squirm under the eye, a living, writhing mound of wooden sepia-toned serpents. The tiered roofs were tiled, green like scales, and gleaming with an unhealthy luster under the light of the setting sun. There were 6 of them in all, 6 up-curled roofs of steadily diminishing size, opening like the hood of a cobra over the verdant crown of Meishan. An auspicious number, Jin thought. "What is this doing here in CATHAY?" said Zeng, appalled. "Who built it?" He sensed, as did they all, that they were intruders on unhallowed ground, trespassers on a graveyard for the inhuman dead. The gods, if one believed in such things, spoke that little bit more clearly in such places. Mountaintops and deserts and storm-racked atolls, places where the elemental winds blew unimpeded from the far north. In the dark lands, one could stumble upon such places easily. In civilized lands, they were better hidden, but they were there nonetheless. Sacred places to the children of chaos. They were sites in which some fluke of geography or particularly heinous act had allowed the essence of one of the 4 to congeal upon the mortal plane. Regardless of the deity who claimed them, chaos shrines were sacrosanct, above the furious infighting and favor currying that more typically characterized the interactions between rival warbands and the followers of opposing powers. The most heathen of barbarian chieftains would hesitate before committing murder in such a place, for fear of angering their gods. "It is a temple to the dark power," said Jin. Zeng spat superstitiously. It is as deserted as the rest of Xi'an." "We will soon see." Jin waved them forward. A day ago, they might have questioned his right to give instructions, but that was before Punan, Zhang Heng, and the effective dispatch of 2 demonettes. Mei dumped her bags into the undergrowth and unpacked her bow. Yijin took up a short spear, hefting it in both hands. Bao drew his massive knife. Big, even in the ogre's hand, it would have practically been a 2-handed jian in anyone else's. Jin pulled on his helmet and watched the expedition advance into the shoulder-high bamboo as though creeping on a sleeping tiger. Mei and Yijun to the right, Bao on the right, Zhang Heng going unsteadily up the middle with his arm draped over Zeng's shoulder. Of them all, only Bao, against whom the bamboo cane stood only to the waist, looked even remotely at ease. They had not gone far when Mei cursed and tripped, falling headfirst into the bamboo with a woody crash. Zeng turned to chide the girl for her clumsiness, but before he could, she was lurching upright, her dark hair bobbing above the canes. Only it was not Mei. This girl was tangle-haired and puffy-eyed, like someone who had reveled too hard for too long, and now had only the vaguest sense of why. Mei herself was on her feet a moment later, looking around in confusion, apparently unaware of what she had tripped over. The waif seemed to pass something to her. The bamboo made it impossible for Jin to see what it was, though he saw Mei's eyes widen as she received it. The girl stepped back, spots of red appearing on her clothing, which, judging by the way her face suddenly split, seemed to please her greatly. She pushed the bloody object back into Mei's chest and giggled as the peasant sank into the bamboo. Yejun, who was standing closest, and presumably seeing clearest, gave a cry and ran over, tackling the strange girl to the ground. But even as the pair dropped, the canes around them came alive. Scores of dirty, disheveled villagers staggered upright from where they appeared to have been sleeping rough, rubbing their faces and looking blearily around, as if they had not seen the sun in days. "Thralls of the snake!" Jin snapped, drawing his sword from its sheath. They had found the people of Punan. As if Jin's words had been a whip across his back, Zeng raised his hands. The alchemist made an inscrutable sequence of mystic passes before uttering a leaden syllable in the dragon tongue. Oh, that's cool. So they know the language of magic is the dragon tongue. That makes sense. The elemental winds billowed around him, and a swarm of silver daggers shot from his outstretched hand. The blades slashed through the bamboo canes to sight down charging villagers by the dozen. Fallen kin did not seem to concern them, however, and even maimed they came on. shouting profane battle cries and announcing their devotion to the Lord of Excess. One ran headlong into Bao, only to bounce off the ogre's belly plate. The leering devil mercenary guffawed, idly cuffing the hoe-wielding peasant with a fist the size of a beer barrel. The man flew 30 feet with his head twisted halfway around his neck, dead long before he crashed into the pagoda's wooden doors. The rest crowded in with a motley assortment of farming tools and knives, undaunted, determined to be the one who brought the ogre down. Bao stomped on a woman, grinding her legs to jelly, chopped another man clean in half like meat on a chopping board, picked up another struggling peasant before straightening up and sank his teeth into their arm. A sickening crunch and twist parted the screaming peasant from their limb. One of the peasant thralls stumbled backwards into Jianhong. The nobleman blinked suddenly, as though he had been in a trance in Punan and only then awoken. He looked disdainfully at the peasant, and then, so fast that Jin could not even see it, had his arm buried up to the elbow in the thrall's chest. His fist flickered with dragonfire as he wrenched it out, the peasant burbling insensibly before toppling over backwards. Damn, the Shukagins can just punch through people's chests? Good lord. Bao, meanwhile, grinding his unfortunate victim's arm between his teeth with every sign of enjoyment, proceeded to hurl the rest of her into the mob like a bolus, knocking half a dozen to the ground. If these peasants intended to bring down a dragon-blooded Shukagun, an ogre, an alchemist of the Iron Court, then they would need more than a few improvised spears to do it. Unfortunately for Jianhong and the others, they had it. Slithering through the pagoda's splintered doorway came something from the fevered nightmares of Koresh. From the waist up, it was an ordinary woman, albeit one possessed of an extraordinary and otherworldly beauty. Her skin was pale. Her lips were black. Golden torques and bracers clapped slender arms, of which she had 4. Segmented armor encrusted with jewels encased her torso, with a long silk skirt underneath and a ruff around the neck. A prehensile tongue flickered between her pointed teeth. Below the waist, however, she was far more inhuman. Her lower quarters were long and sinuous, sheathed in obsidian black scales, muscular contractions propelling her into the fray faster than any jade knight could gallop. Jin tightened his grip on his sword, wondering if this, finally, was the snake of Mei Shan, the legendary denied one that he had journeyed the length of CATHAY to slay. He had been expecting something more. With a sword in each of her 4 hands, the snake warrior struck at Bao. The ogre bellowed, sporting a dozen freshly opened gashes by the time he was able to turn and hack at the snake with his dao. The inhuman warrior twisted aside as though dancing, pirouetting under the clumsy swing and raking a blade across each of his hamstrings. Bao crashed to the ground with a roar of fury. The surrounding thralls threw themselves at the crippled ogre, hacking, stabbing, and clubbing with giddy abandon. Zeng, however, was not yet done. A ferocious gust of wind-blown metal flakes blasted their weapons, their shoes, and even the clothes on their backs to solid lead. Men and women struggled to lift their weapons, falling in a heap on top of the helpless Bao as the alchemist readied his hands for another spell. Elsewhere, Jin saw Yi Jun rise from the bamboo with a bloody knife in his hand and a look of triumph in his eyes. It remained in place, even as a quartet of flashing sword blades sheared his head from his shoulders. Jin felt a stab of regret. Of them all, he had liked their eager young guide the most. A second snake woman hissed ecstatically and slithered after Zeng and Bao. Not the denied one, then. Servants, perhaps. Champions. "For the Iron Dragon!" Zeng roared, throwing out both hands in a fanning motion and spraying the jungle in a 180-degree arc around him with molten gold. The snake warrior that had just beheaded Ye Jun thrashed and screeched, smoke coiling about her flesh, scales, and enameled plate, as her flesh, scales, and enameled plate melted under the glowing torrent. So, they were mortal. That would be useful information for when Jin came face to face with their mistress. He's like, oh, they're not demons. The flash of a sword took Zeng's right hand before he could cast again, turning the spray of gold into one of blood. An excited thrall clubbed the disbelieving wizard over the head, as Bao, still bellowing in fury, finally succumbed to a peasant spear through the socket of his eye. It left only Jiang Hong. Surrounded by the sibilant hiss of bamboo, the Shukengen turned his ostentatiously jeweled sword one way and then the other, his terror as plain as the sweat on his face. "Help me, Jin!" he gasped, seeing the champion of a share striding up behind, drawn sword hissing across the bamboo canes. "If we make it to the horse, we can..." His eyes bulged, widening in shock, as if the dragon-clawed hilt of Jinwu's sword was the very last thing he had been expecting to see protruding from his chest at that moment. It might have been. "I'm afraid I cannot help you, Master Fu. You see," Jin withdrew his sword, the fine steel making a kissing sound as it slid through the fat Shukengen's heart a second time. "This is a holy place." With the slaughter done, the revelry began. "He was a traitor!" Sinuous fingers swayed to a music that they alone could hear. Muscle-bound Northmen, most likely barbarians from Ashung, now enthralled to the Denied One just like the Punan villagers, breached kegs of foul-smelling spirits and drank to the glory of the gods. Demonettes and scraps of armor capered from one group to the other, offering their deadly favors to all and sundry. The snake of Mei Shan had corrupted an army here in the hinterlands, just as his master had foreseen from his own profane altar in the Dark Tower. He watched as several cultists found the hole that Mei, apparently still living, had crawled into, laughing as they dragged her back to the pagoda to be bound and gagged alongside the moaning Xingliu. They were about to learn what it means to be a prisoner of the tormentors. Soon the warband would have some real music to dance to. Jin looked around, his hand resting on the grip of his sword, but the revelers seemed to have accepted him as one of their own. Somehow they sensed the mark of his master upon his soul. One of the demonettes, lounging on a divan of groaning thralls and cultists, beckoned him over, but he spurned its invitations with a snarl. It was nothing like these savages. Their pursuit blinded them to the Dark Prince's true gift: harmony, pleasure and pain in their rightful balance, and through balance, perfection. That's great. That's so great. I love that we're getting to see how Slaanesh is able to, like, tempt Cathayans. Like, big boy Cathayans. "Take me to the snake of Mei Shan," he demanded of a thrall who appeared too intoxicated by the scene to protest. He simply nodded eagerly. For what fanatic would hesitate before delivering another to the glory of his goddess? They entered the pagoda in a scene of screaming opulence. If it was a temple, then its deity was excess. Every gemstone and bolt of silk that had ever found itself on this side of the Serpent River seemed to have finished its journey in this room. The air was thick with the smell of wine and incense and the spices of End. And yet, Jin sensed, it was not enough. Nor would it ever be enough. The creature who could command such tribute from poor villagers demanded more and better. She deserved more. Jin felt his jaw fall open as he finally beheld the object of his quest. Dechala, the Denied One. The Snake of Mei Shan. How could one begin to describe her? One could only see it for oneself and hope to endure the revelation with sanity and tact, or die the richer for having flown so close to true understanding. That is so cool. So it describes witnessing Dechala is akin to witnessing the realm of chaos itself. Dechala smiled down at him from a throne of her own lustrous coils, and it was as if the sun rose again just for her, filling her treasure chamber with charisma and light. Jin could not tell if he looked upon a mortal chieftain, mantled in such gifts that she had left humanity far behind her, or if she was one of the mighty few who ascended to true demonhood. The line, Jin supposed, was very fine. One day, he hoped, he would know this firsthand. He had changed a great deal over the decades he had spent in the Darklands. He had learned much. Joining with Jiang Hong in his expedition had been his own idea, rather than his master's. Not because he had needed the help or desired the company, but for 6 willing sacrifices, his patron's profane number, to placate the gods over the desecration of their shrine. The 6th would be Dechala herself, or himself, if it came to that. Even in death, the Dark Prince would find him dutiful, his first step on the path to glory. And yet, all ambition slipped from his thoughts then, all presence of mind crumbling like a pretty roof before its first monsoon. He tightened his grip on his sword, but could not for the life of him imagine why he had brought it. A gift, perhaps? He held the blade flat across the palms of his hands and looked at it. The celestial steel blade was so finely polished as to appear almost silver. Earlier said it was silver. Runes in the ancient language ran its length, a line of verse that no one Jin Wu had ever met knew how to read. The hilt was solid gold, the pommel a piece of jade the size of a goose egg, clutched in the stylized claws of a golden dragon. Green tassels fluttered from the crosspiece. Yes, that was what it had to be. A gift. A token from the far north for this numinous southern queen. One more treasure for her ever-growing collection. Kneeling stiffly, he offered the blade out to her. Her eyes sparkled like yellow diamonds, even as her cold face remained hard and her forked tongue flickered across her lips. If the Moon Empress were to descend from the celestial palace for the first time in 1,000 years, she would not have been half the vision that Dechala was then. Her skin was the pale lavender of watered-down wine. Her voluptuous figure in gold-etched scallops of form-fitting armor plate and a kingdom's ransom in jewelry. An extravagant tangle of purple hair hid long, elf-like ears and ran wild down her arms, of which she had not 2, nor even 4, but 6. A wondrous number, Jin recalled. The denied one tapped out a melody on her long, muscular tail, each hand answering to a mind and a muse all of its own. "You wish to see me," she said, her voice like gold silk drawn slowly over an erotic figurine. Jin stared. His outstretched arms trembled under the weight of his blade. Of course he wanted to see her. What heathen would not? "Why have you come?" Jin opened his mouth to answer. He wanted to, but he could not seem to remember what the answer. And it did not seem particularly important now in any case. What the answer was, I suppose. Instead, he found himself wondering how this divine creature had earned her epithet. Surely, even the Dark Prince himself had never denied her anything. Whatever it was that she lacked, Jin swore to himself then that he would not rest again until she had it. "Perfection," he said at last, gazing up at her in wonder. There was a rustle of movement as Dechala lowered herself into her thick coils, just enough to lay a hand on Jin's proffered sword. A shiver of pleasure passed through his being. "Dance with me," she said. There was no question. He pictured himself as a younger man, dancing through the streets of Fuheng, of Shenyang, and all the way to the imperial city of Weijin, but not stopping there, never stopping, of taking the Dark Prince's revel east from there to Fushao and to the far foreign lands across the Jade Sea, leaving only ruin and satiation in his wake. His smile was his answer. In that moment, he could think of nothing he would rather do. Ah, that's cool. All right. So, really good story. Okay, so it seems that they don't retcon her origin story, or if at least. So, okay, I'm gonna make a separate video about this because it's something I've been looking into, and I pretty much think I found the answer. There's been a lot of questions going on about like what is going on with Dechala? What's going on with Dechala? Like, because the Creative Assembly keeps saying something like, "Oh, she has like a mysterious past. Like we don't know her history or her vague origins." When if you know your Dechala lore, or if you watched the Lorebeards episode, which you should go check out on Dechala, which was super freaking awesome, of 3 hours of Dechala lore, if you're interested, I'll leave the link to that down below. Dechala has a very, very straightforward origin story when she was originally designed, which is that she is a Ulthwani elf princess from Ulthwan, which is why I said Ulthwani. Not a high elf, because there wasn't such thing as high elves back then. They were just elves, because this was during the time of Anarion. So during the Cataclysm, she was an elven princess that a demon prince named Samael fell in love with her, and, well, he didn't fall in love with her. He fell in love with the idea of owning her, and he tortures her family and all this other stuff until she eventually is given to him as his wife, and a whole bunch of stuff happens, but she eventually flees from him because she becomes more favored than he in Slaanesch's eyes, or at least Samael felt that way, and Samael demanded that she be returned to him so that he could basically kill her, and Slaanesh refuses because he likes her too much, but he gives him a bargain where he says, as long as Samael, the demon prince, continues to exist, Dechala cannot ascend. So she cannot become a demon prince. Demonhood is denied to her. That's why she is the denied one. None of that has been explicitly overwritten, but between, I've had people messaging me being like, is Dechala human now? And I think the answer is no, but kinda, but no, but yes, but no. Like I said, I'll make a separate video on it, but Games Workshop the lore of Warhammer has changed a lot since Dechala was published. She was originally published in like 5th edition, Warhammer Fantasy and the Champions of Chaos supplement, which is when her miniature was also revealed, and this would have been in like the really early 2000s, if not late 90s. I want to say late 90s, but back then you could have chaos elves. You could have elves that were mutated by chaos. That was not unusual, and it wasn't like all over the place, but they were common. Like, mutant elves were not a big deal. If you go read the Gilead series, Gilead's a perfect example of this. The Gilead books have full-on fucking chaos elves in them. They have like really weird types of elves that if you read it with like an understanding of nowadays background, you go, oh, that's kind of weird. Now, back then, that was fine. Today, there is explicit rules. So like, I talk to a lot of people that write for the roleplay game, for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, who deal with GW a lot about like what can and cannot be done. And one of the hardcore rules is that elves cannot mutate. Period. It's not sometimes they can mutate. It's not, oh, there's an exception. They physically cannot mutate. There is no such thing as a chaos mutant elf, which is exactly what Dechala is. Like that's like GW Bible levels of lore. I personally think that it's a little restrictive. I think it's fine to say that in 99.9999999% of cases, elves cannot mutate. But it seems silly to me to say that it's utterly impossible, because I can think of ways that the answer would be, oh wait, no, they totally can under specific circumstances. Like if you hit an elf with like a warp fire spell from the lore of Tzeentch that causes mutation, the elf will mutate. And the idea that Dechala, who has been one of Slaanesch's most favored for at least 6,000 years, if not longer, is, I think the idea that she, her being an elf that mutated because she's been dedicated for so long and she's so favored, and that she would have ascended to demon princedom, but because she didn't, the only way that Slaanesh can show her further favor is by mutating her. And that it takes a crazy long time, but that she's mutated to such a crazy extent where she has like 4 extra arms, and she's got a snake body, and she's got like spines coming out of her, and she's got like a big snake mouth and fangs, and like she's so heavily mutated, but she's completely in control of her body, and she's not anywhere close to spawndom. And I think that like would be a good case of showing how, because she's an elf, she's so resilient towards mutation. But anyway, so that's that. We'll say super great fun story. Please do let me know what y'all think, because this is an hour. Fuck, this took me an hour. Holy God. I really enjoyed this. There were some minor mistakes, but I don't think it's a huge deal. The Tarmacon invasion, to be fair, figuring out when Tarmacon invades is actually like a little annoying because it's not included in very many places. So I can totally get how David Guymer goofed on when the invasion happened with Sayl the Faithless, because I'm pretty sure what they're referencing is the Tarmacon invasion. So the character in the story should have been talking about that he fought Sayl 10 years ago, not 40 years ago. Other than that, you could keep everything virtually the exact same. It's interesting, he said his master in the Dark Tower. The Dark Tower. The Dark Tower isn't and he mentions his master in the Darklands. I'm wondering if that's a reference to the Black Fortress, and if his master was well, no, because it seems like his master was a Slaanesh person. I don't know who his master was. Like, it seems vaguely implied that maybe Sayl was his master. Like, he goes after Sayl the Faithless, like he pursues him to try and kills him, but Sayl the Faithless ends up converting him instead and like getting him to fall to chaos. I think that's what they're suggesting. But Dark Tower also kind of makes me think Be'lakor, but I think it's meant to be Sayl, to kind of like tie the various characters together. Because this one definitely has like, oh look, there's Sayl, and oh look, there's Dechala. Which is neat. But anyway, I'm gonna get out of here. Like I said, I'll do a separate video. I've got 2 videos where I really want to talk about some important stuff regarding like the DLC. As far as like what's the deal with Dechala, I'm gonna make that its own little separate discussion video, and I'm also gonna do a video talking about the Mortal Knights of Slaanesh and why we're not seeming to get them, but why we might be able to still get them, but through like a slightly different avenue. Anyway, so I'm gonna go. I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of the story, and I will say, I'm really curious about the hulking lizard monsters. I think it's talking about lizardmen. Oh no, you know what? It's Nakai, right? It's a Nakai reference. So yeah, it is the lizardmen. Okay, so apparently the lizardmen are abducting people. Nakai's like having people abducted to sacrifice. I mean, that's very Sotek-y. Well, actually, considering our point of view character is the fallen chaos guy, I wonder if the lizardmen have been capturing and killing people because they know there's corruption here. But this is exciting because this means this is kind of a fun canonical story. So this means that Dechala actually did go to Southern CATHAY, because when you get the short stories, it's like, oh, there's official lore by an official Black Library author. I mean, David Guymer is one of the big ones. So like, oh, this is like an actual story. I mean, I wouldn't say it's like hard canon. I'd say it's like soft canon. But yeah, anyway, I'm gonna get out of here. Let me know what y'all thought. I'll talk to you later.